All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today we're tackling something that is profoundly universal yet deeply, deeply personal, and that's the Stoic guide to grief and loss. Look, grief is heavy. It's a massive, sensitive weight that literally every single one of us is going to carry at some point in our lives. And honestly, when we're in the thick of it, we're just looking for anything to help us make sense of the pain. So that is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to use the ancient, time-tested wisdom of Stoicism to help us find our footing.
True Stoicism requires us to feel our grief, not bury it. I really want those words to sink in for a second. So often, we're told to just be strong or push through it when we're facing a monumental loss. But before we go any further today, it's absolutely crucial to validate whatever it is you might be feeling. The philosophy we're unpacking here, it's not about ignoring your pain, not at all. It's about giving you a solid framework to survive it and eventually to grow alongside it.
So, here's our roadmap for today's discussion. First, the emotionless Stoic myth. Second, what we cannot control. Third, accepting the nature of loss. Fourth, reframing our grief narrative. And finally, daily tools for healing.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the emotionless Stoic myth.
Before we can actually use Stoic philosophy to heal, we have to break down a huge cultural roadblock. There's this really common modern misconception that Stoicism is all about the unfeeling, robotic suppression of emotions, just bottling everything up. But actually, the true Stoic approach is about experiencing your pain without being completely consumed by it. The historical Stoics, they loved deeply, which meant they grieved deeply. When Marcus Aurelius lost his children, or when Seneca wrote his letters on grief, they definitely weren't practicing toxic emotional suppression. Instead, they were building this incredibly resilient, practical framework for acknowledging their profound pain, all while keeping their internal compass completely intact.
Moving right along to Section 2, what we cannot control.
This brings us to an absolutely core philosophical concept that helps us manage the incredibly overwhelming nature of grief, and it's called the dichotomy of control. Basically, this is the Stoic practice of strictly separating what is entirely in our power from what is completely out of our hands. Let me tell you, understanding this ancient, battle-tested concept is step number 1 in finding peace amidst the chaos. When grief hits us, our first instinct is usually to just try and control everything around us, right? Because we feel so helpless. But the Stoic steps back and draws a very firm, logical line in the sand between their internal mind and the external world.
When you really confront reality, you see that the massive, overwhelming majority of our experiences, illness, mortality, the actions of other people, the events of the past, they all sit in this giant category of things we simply don't control. And when you're experiencing a profound loss, almost everything about that situation sits right there in that massive slice. But notice that tiny sliver remaining. That represents the things we actually do control: our reactions, our judgments, and the stories we tell ourselves about our grief. It looks incredibly small, I know, but that tiny sliver is remarkably powerful. In fact, it is literally the only place we should be spending our energy.
Which leads us to Section 3, accepting the nature of loss. Okay, so moving from just recognizing our lack of control to actually accepting it, that is the hardest, deepest work we can do. It requires us to shift from passive suffering over to active acceptance. Now, the Stoics used a highly specific tool for this called memento mori, which translates from Latin to remember you must die. Now, I know, that sounds incredibly dark at first glance. But you have to understand, this practice of reflecting on mortality isn't about ancient Rome or being morbidly obsessed with death. It's actually this deeply grounding tool for appreciating the present. It's about looking at the reality of your life today and accepting the natural order of existence. By remembering that everything is temporary, including ourselves, by the way, the Stoics learned to appreciate what they had while they had it, and to accept its loss as just a natural, inevitable return to nature.
And building directly on top of that is the concept of amor fati, which translates to love of fate. This is the practice of embracing everything that happens to us, and yes, that includes deep, painful loss, as necessary. Notice the language there. It doesn't say tolerate fate, it says love fate. This connects right back to that dichotomy of control we were just talking about. If we can't control that massive slice of things outside our power, well, the only logical, peaceful path forward is to embrace it. The Stoics essentially let go of the illusion of control to find genuine, unshakable peace. They accepted that the universe has a rhythm, and honestly, a lot of our suffering just comes from fighting a rhythm we simply cannot change.
Let's turn to Section 4, reframing our grief narrative.
Once we truly accept the nature of loss, we gain this incredible ability to actively change the story we're telling ourselves. The waves cannot be controlled,
but the anchor keeps us grounded. I love this because it's such a powerful metaphor for exactly what we've been talking about. Grief acts like a violent, unpredictable storm. It comes in waves. Sometimes you see the wave coming from a mile away, and sometimes it just completely knocks you over from behind when you least expect it. You can't control the ocean, right? You can't just command the waves to stop. But your mind, your judgments, and your Stoic practices, that tiny sliver we actually do control, that serves as your anchor. It doesn't stop the storm, but it absolutely stops you from being washed away.
And finally, Section 5, Daily Tools for Healing. So, this is where we transition from understanding grief conceptually to taking active, empowering steps. It's time to put these ancient concepts to work in your modern life. Let's walk through this practical toolkit together. First, acknowledge your pain without judgment. Remember the true Stoic approach. Feel it, don't bury it. It is absolutely okay to hurt. Second, identify the tiny sliver of things in your control today. Look, when you're grieving, maybe your control only extends to getting out of bed, or drinking a glass of water, or just how you speak to a friend. That's fine. Focus only on that sliver. Third, practice letting go of the uncontrollable waves. When the storm hits, remind yourself of your anchor. And finally, reframe loss as a natural part of existence. Try using memento mori not to induce sadness, but to spark profound gratitude for the time you actually had. This is exactly how you empower yourself through the healing process.
Which leaves us with one final provocative question to close out our explainer today. How will you choose to carry your own history moving forward? The loss has happened. That sits firmly in the massive slice of things entirely outside of your control. But the way you carry it, the meaning you assign to it today, tomorrow, and the next day, that is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I genuinely hope this Stoic framework helps you build your anchor and helps you find just a bit of peace in the storm.